When two homeless twin girls approached Johnny Depp in desperation, he had no idea of the extraordinary truth they carried. But the moment he heard their heartfelt confession, his emotions overtook him. What happened next will leave you in awe. Stick around until the end to witness this touching story, and don't forget to subscribe and share where you're tuning in from today. The soft glow of early morning filtered through the Venetian blinds of a sterile hospital room, casting faint stripes of light across Johnny Depp's relaxed arm. Seated quietly in a cushioned chair, he watched a young nurse with a tired but kind smile as she efficiently managed the blood donation process. Above, fluorescent lights buzzed gently, blending with the distant rhythm of beeping monitors from the rooms beyond. Johnny's gaze shifted to the window, where sunlight danced on the glass, momentarily drawing his thoughts away from the busy schedule awaiting him. For now, he was simply a man, engaged in an act of quiet significance. A slender tube connected his arm to a half-filled blood bag, its deep crimson contrasting against the sterile white of the room. The nurse worked with practiced care, occasionally glancing up to check on him. "You doing okay, Mr. Depp?" she asked softly, her voice breaking the tranquil silence. Johnny turned from the window, offering a reassuring smile. "Yeah, all good. I've had worse things taken from me," he quipped lightly, though his tone carried a hint of wistfulness beneath the humor. The nurse chuckled softly, adjusting the clip on the bag. "Well, this is for a good cause. You're helping save lives today." "Happy to do it," Johnny replied warmly. He tilted his head, watching the bag slowly fill. "It's a small gesture, but if it makes a difference for someone, I'm glad." For a moment, the room was filled with a comfortable silence, the kind that comes with shared understanding. The nurse gently checked his arm, speaking again as she worked. "Almost done here," she said with a kind smile, breaking the quiet. Johnny leaned back slightly, feeling the gentle tug of the process on his arm. As he sat there, his mind wandered to the obligations waiting for him once he stepped outside. But here, in this fleeting moment, he found solace in simply being present, in doing something meaningful. He exhaled slowly, grateful for the stillness. "All set," the nurse announced, removing the needle with care. Pressing a piece of gauze to his arm, she secured it with tape. Johnny flexed his fingers and stood, rolling down his sleeve with a grin. "Well, I didn't faint, so I'd call that a win," he joked, his voice laced with lighthearted charm. The nurse chuckled, her weary eyes softening with warmth. "Not every day we see celebrities during National Blood Donor Awareness Month," she remarked, maintaining her professional yet kind demeanor. Johnny shrugged, his lips curving into a lopsided grin. "Donating blood doesn't need a red carpet. Everyone's got something to give." The simplicity of his words gave her pause. "That's true," she murmured, before resuming her task of packing up supplies and placing the filled blood bag onto a nearby tray. As Johnny prepared to leave, the nurse gestured toward the refreshments. "Take your time. Grab some juice or a cookie before you head out. It'll help with your sugar levels." There was no rush, no pressure to vacate the space for the next donor. Instead, the moment was filled with care and the quiet intention of ensuring this meaningful act was completed properly. Johnny nodded, tipping the brim of his hat with a grin before making his way to the door. The hospital hallway greeted him with its gentle hum of activity, a stark contrast to the serene donation room. Nurses moved with purpose, their soft-soled shoes barely audible against the polished floors. Distant conversations, the soft chime of call buttons, and the faint ring of a phone formed a calm yet constant background rhythm. As Johnny strolled toward the exit, he instinctively reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He paused, staring at the screen for a moment before unlocking it. A series of messages lit up from his assistant, reminding him of an upcoming meeting with a film director, a potential comeback role that would usually command his immediate attention. Instead, Johnny typed a deliberate reply, letting his assistant know he'd just finished donating blood for the Blood Donor Awareness Program. Satisfied, he slid the phone back into his pocket as the hospital's main entrance drew closer. Stepping outside, the crisp morning air greeted him, cool and invigorating. The sun had climbed higher, its rays casting long, sharp shadows across the bustling street. Johnny paused, inhaling deeply, savoring the calmness of the moment. Then a subtle movement caught his eye. Two small figures lingering near an alley across the street. Squinting against the sunlight, he made out the fragile silhouettes of two girls, no older than 7 or 8. One of them clutched an old battered bag that seemed to hold a mysterious brown liquid. Their thin frames and tattered clothing painted a stark picture of hardship. Johnny felt a pang in his chest, an inexplicable pull to understand their story. He stood at the edge of the hospital entrance, observing them from afar. After a moment of contemplation, he decided to approach. He waited at the crosswalk for the light to change, his eyes never leaving the two figures. When the signal turned green, Johnny crossed with deliberate steps, careful to seem approachable, yet non-threatening. As Johnny neared, the details became more apparent. The girls' sunken cheeks and identical features revealed they were twins, and their eyes constantly darted around the street as though expecting danger at any moment. They didn't seem to recognize him as a celebrity, a fact that both reassured him and deepened his awareness of their grim reality. The older twin was the first to notice him. Her voice, thin and trembling, broke the silence. "Sir, please help," she pleaded, gripping her sister's hand tightly. Johnny halted, keeping a respectful distance so as not to startle them. He cleared his throat softly and spoke in the gentlest tone he could muster. "Good morning," he said, trying to seem as non-threatening as possible. The younger twin gave a timid nod before speaking quickly, almost in a rush. "Mister, do you have any spare money, please?" Her voice trembled with urgency. Johnny furrowed his brow, his gaze shifting back and forth between the two girls. Slowly, he reached into his coat pocket. With careful fingers, he pulled out a folded bill. "Here," he said, offering the money to the younger twin. "Get yourself something warm to eat." The girl snatched the bill from his hand, clutching it like a lifeline. Her wide eyes conveyed a mixture of gratitude and desperation, emotions no child should ever have to experience. As Johnny stood there, observing the fragile girls, a deep sense of concern weighed on him. What had brought them to this point? Where were their parents? His attention shifted to the bag one of them carried. As he got closer, a foul stench hit his nose. The odor was not just the smell of dirt, but something far worse, something medical and potentially dangerous for a child to be carrying. Before Johnny could ask anything, a harsh, raspy voice echoed from deeper in the alley. "Girls, what did I say? Get back here." The twins visibly tensed at the sound, their bodies coiling as if they were ready to flee. Johnny turned toward the voice, his eyes adjusting to the shadows of the alley. A thin, hunched figure of a woman emerged, her voice laced with authority as she called out once more. "I told you not to wander off." The twins exchanged a swift, fearful glance before silently disappearing around a corner into the alley, leaving Johnny standing alone on the sidewalk. The sudden emptiness where the girls had been felt stark and heavy. Johnny stayed rooted to the spot, his mind racing with questions and concern, his gaze lingering on the spot where they had vanished. The image of their hollow eyes and the mysterious bag filled his thoughts, haunting him like a shadow against the bright life he'd just left behind at the hospital. Standing at the edge of the alley, Johnny couldn't shake the feeling of dread. What kind of life could children have in a place like that? His stomach churned at the thought of such innocence hidden away in dark corners. He considered following them, even taking a step forward, but just as quickly, several homeless individuals appeared from the shadows of the alley. The homeless individuals approached, their gazes wary and tinged with hostility. Johnny instinctively lowered his head, trying to keep his identity concealed. He stepped aside to let them pass, but one of them brushed roughly against his shoulder, muttering a curse for blocking their way. The encounter served as a sharp reminder of the harsh realities of street life and the risks that came with his celebrity status. A sinking feeling settled in Johnny's chest as he realized how dangerous it might be for him to enter the alley alone and unprepared. Rather than leave, he decided to stay nearby, opting for a more cautious approach. Slipping on his sunglasses to obscure his identity, Johnny made his way into a nearby convenience store. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly as he walked down the aisles, eventually picking out a juice and a hot dog to refuel after his blood donation. The transaction at the counter was quick and impersonal, a stark contrast to the rawness of his earlier encounter with the twins. After paying, Johnny exited the store and took a seat on a bench outside. His eyes remained locked on the mouth of the alley, though he appeared casual as he sipped his juice and nibbled on the hot dog. As he sat there, the food barely registering in his mind, Johnny's thoughts were consumed with the twins and the mystery surrounding their lives. The bustle of the street continued all around him, but he remained motionless, his attention unwavering. He was determined to wait as long as it took to see if the girls would return. Time seemed to slow as the sun climbed higher in the sky, shortening the shadows along the pavement. People passed by, wrapped up in their own lives, unaware of the silent tension unfolding nearby. Johnny had barely made a dent in his drink when he noticed movement at the alley's entrance. The twins reappeared, their small forms darting out cautiously, glancing up and down the street. Without missing a beat, Johnny stood up, sealing the lid of his juice bottle and grabbing the paper bag with the untouched hot dog. He began to follow them, maintaining a careful distance and keeping his steps measured, determined not to alert them to his presence. The twins moved with purpose, heading straight back to the hospital he had just left. As they approached the hospital, Johnny's curiosity deepened. What business could two homeless children have at a medical facility? He watched as, rather than using the main entrance, the girls approached a back door where a nurse appeared to meet them. Johnny's heart raced as he watched the interaction unfold from behind a corner. The nurse took the brown bag from the twins with practiced discretion, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Her movements were quick and efficient, suggesting this was not a chance encounter, but a regular arrangement. The nurse provided the girls with a new bag, hanging it carefully around one girl's neck along with a bottle of medication. She hugged them both briefly before urging them to leave quickly. The entire exchange took less than a minute, but it spoke volumes about the complex situation these children were in. As the girls turned to leave, Johnny realized he needed to act fast if he wanted to learn more. He walked back quickly, taking a turn to hide before they could pass his way. The girls didn't see him, too focused on their mission and surroundings. When they had walked past, Johnny looked back towards where the nurse had been, but she had already disappeared. Before the twins could reach the busy front of the hospital, Johnny removed his sunglasses and approached them once more, this time in the quieter side section. The healthier twin recognized him immediately, her eyes widening with surprise. Her sister, however, was focused solely on the food and drink Johnny held, her gaze revealing a deep, almost desperate hunger. "Hello again," Johnny said softly, crouching down to their level. His voice was gentle, non-threatening. "I saw you talking to that nurse. Is everything okay?" The girls exchanged a nervous glance, clearly uncertain whether to trust him. Johnny smiled reassuringly and decided to offer them kindness. "You two look like you could use this more than me," he said, extending his untouched hot dog. The sick twin's eyes flicked toward the juice bottle in Johnny's other hand. Noticing her interest, Johnny added, "I've had some of the juice already, but I can buy you a new one later if you'd like." "We don't mind," the sick twin whispered, her voice small. "We often find bottled juices in trash cans. This one's much better." She looked at him with pleading eyes. "Please, I'm so thirsty." Johnny's heart tightened at her words. He longed to buy them fresh, new drinks, but he knew that leaving now would mean losing track of them again. Without hesitation, he handed over the juice. "Here, take this for now. I promise I'll get you a new one later, okay?" The sick twin eagerly gulped the drink, while the healthier twin took a small bite of the hot dog before giving the rest to her sister. Johnny watched them, a wave of concern and determination washing over him. "Can you tell me your names?" Johnny asked gently. "I'm Johnny." The healthier twin spoke first. "I'm Rose," she said, then gestured to her sister. "This is Rena." Johnny smiled warmly. "Rose and Rena, it's nice to meet you properly. Listen, I want to help you, but I need to understand your situation better. Can you tell me why you're out here alone? Where are your parents?" The twins exchanged another glance, their silent communication evident. Finally, Rose turned back to Johnny, her young face etched with a weariness that no child should bear. It's complicated," Rose said, her voice trembling. "But we need help. Rena needs help." As Rose began to explain their story, Johnny listened with rapt attention, his concern deepening with every word. The tale that unfolded was one of hardship, survival, and unimaginable struggles, one that no child should ever have to experience. As the twins spoke, Johnny felt a growing determination to help them and their family in any way he could. Rose's voice was quiet but steady as she began to explain their circumstances. "We live with our mom in the alley," she said, gesturing vaguely behind her. "There are others there too, lots of people without homes." Johnny nodded in understanding, his expression calm and encouraging. He didn't rush Rose, allowing her to share their story at her own pace. "Mom's sick," Rose continued, glancing at Rena. "Like Rena, they both have bags." She pointed to the bag hanging around Rena's neck, and Johnny's suspicions about it were confirmed. "Is it a colostomy bag?" he asked gently. The twins looked at him blankly, unfamiliar with the term. Johnny rephrased, "The bag for waste from your body?" Rose nodded slowly. "Yes, that's what the nurse calls it. Mom and Rena need them." Johnny's mind raced, trying to understand the medical implications. "Have you heard of Crohn's disease?" he asked. But once again, the girls showed no recognition of the term. Rena, who had been quiet up to this point, spoke up. "The nurse gives us new bags and medicine. She's nice, but it's not enough." Rose nodded in agreement. "Please," she said, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and desperation. "We need money. Mom says my sister can be normal like me one day, but it's expensive," Rose added, her voice tinged with sadness. A lump formed in Johnny's throat as the weight of their situation hit him. The enormity of what these young girls were facing settled heavily on his shoulders. He wanted to help, but he knew that giving money without understanding the full scope of the problem could be harmful in the long run. "I want to help," Johnny said, his voice steady, "but I think I need to speak with your mother first. Can you take me to her?" The twins exchanged a look, this time with a touch of uncertainty. After a moment, Rose nodded. "We can show you our tent," she said, though a hint of hesitation lingered in her voice. Johnny caught it and added, "It might be dangerous for me to enter, don't you think?" Johnny paused, considering their words. "I see there are a lot of people there, and they don't always like strangers," he said. "Is there a time when it might be safer?" Rose thought for a moment before replying. "Actually, this is the safest hour," she said. "Most people left to beg on the streets. In the evening, more of them will be coming back to their tents." As Johnny was about to respond, Rena tugged at her sister's sleeve, whispering something in her ear. Rose's eyes widened slightly and she turned back to Johnny. "There's something else," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Who's Uncle Teddy?" Johnny asked, sensing her unease. Rose explained that Uncle Teddy was the self-appointed protector of their homeless community. "He usually sleeps during the day," she said, "but he collects money from others to watch their belongings." The way she spoke made it clear that this so-called protection felt more like an extortion racket. Rena's voice, barely audible, added, "He's a big man. He searches people for valuables." Johnny absorbed the information, understanding that the community had its own complex and potentially dangerous hierarchy. "Where is Uncle Teddy's tent?" he asked. "A few turns before our tent," Rose replied, "but he was sleeping when we left earlier. He usually sleeps for a long time." Johnny nodded, understanding the delicate nature of the situation. "Then we should be very careful and quiet so we don't wake him up," he said, putting his sunglasses back on. "Lead the way, girls. I'll follow you." Johnny stood up, feeling a sense of resolve. As they crossed the street and prepared to enter the alley, a mix of determination and apprehension washed over him. He was stepping into a world far removed from his usual life of film sets and red carpets. But seeing the fragile girls before him, he knew he couldn't turn back now. He was committed to helping them and their mother. Rose took a deep breath, visibly bracing herself. "Okay," she said softly, "follow us and remember to be very quiet." With that, the small group began their cautious journey into the alley, leaving the bustling street behind and entering a world of shadows and secrets. The shift from the sunlit street to the dim alley felt jarring. Johnny blinked, allowing his eyes to adjust to the muted light. The narrow passage was lined with piles of discarded items and makeshift shelters, a testament to human resilience in the face of desperate circumstances. As they ventured deeper into the homeless community's territory, the smell of garbage and decay grew stronger, assaulting Johnny's senses. He followed the girl's lead, careful to match their silent movements. Every step felt precarious, as if the slightest noise might bring unwanted attention. Rose and Rena navigated the maze of debris and tents with practiced ease, their small bodies slipping through gaps that Johnny had to carefully maneuver around. He marveled at their adaptability, while his heart ached at the necessity of such skills in one so young. The alley seemed to stretch on endlessly, each turn revealing more makeshift homes and piles of discarded belongings. Johnny's footsteps were careful, mindful of loose debris that might create noise. The girls moved with a quiet grace born of necessity, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. As they approached what Rose had indicated was Uncle Teddy's tent, the atmosphere grew even more tense. Rose made a sleeping gesture, pressing her finger to her lips. The sound of loud snoring emanated from within a large, patched-up tent, a rhythmic rumble that seemed to vibrate through the alley. Johnny held his breath as they began to creep past, every muscle tense with the effort of moving silently. The girls' faces were masks of concentration, their small bodies rigid with fear. Suddenly, the tense moment was shattered by the shrill ring of Johnny's phone. He'd forgotten to silence it after his hospital visit. Panic surged through him as he fumbled to end the call without checking who it was, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it would wake the entire alley. The group froze in place, hardly daring to breathe as they waited to see if Uncle Teddy would wake up. The snoring had stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was deafening. Johnny could feel sweat beading on his forehead as the seconds ticked by, each moment stretching into an eternity. Rose and Rena stood stock still, their eyes wide with fear as they stared at Uncle Teddy's tent. Johnny's hand hovered over his phone, ready to silence it if it dared to make another sound. The minutes felt like hours, but eventually the snoring resumed, signaling a moment of respite. The relief among them was palpable, though no one dared to vocalize it. Johnny silently mouthed an apology to the twins, his face marked with genuine regret for the close call. He quickly silenced his phone as they pressed on, more attuned than ever to the fragility of their situation. The rest of the journey passed in a blur of hushed footsteps and tense breaths. Johnny's senses were heightened, every shadow around them seeming to harbor potential danger. The girls moved with practiced confidence, leading him through the maze of the homeless encampment. Eventually, they arrived at a large tent, its fabric a deep indigo color. The twins went inside first to prepare their mother, while Johnny stood outside, surrounded by the harsh realities of life in the alley. The smell of rotting garbage was overwhelming, mixing with the musty scent of unwashed bodies and the stinging odor of urine. Rats scurried in the shadows, their tiny claws scraping against discarded cans and bottles. Johnny stood still, trying not to touch anything, struck by the harshness of the twins' daily existence. The greasy residue on every surface, the constant hum of distant traffic, and the echoes of nearby arguments highlighted the ever-present threats of violence and theft. This was their world, a stark contrast to Johnny's life of comfort and luxury. A renewed sense of purpose filled him. He had to help these girls and their family escape this reality. After what seemed like an eternity, but was likely only a few minutes, the twins emerged from the tent and motioned for Johnny to follow. Taking a deep breath, he ducked under the flap, preparing himself to meet the mother of these resilient girls and whatever challenges awaited him. Inside the tent, Johnny's eyes adjusted to the dim light. The space was cramped and filled with an assortment of salvaged items and worn blankets. In the middle of the tent, on a makeshift bed of flattened cardboard boxes, sat a woman who could only be the twins' mother. Marianne's eyes widened when she recognized Johnny Depp, a mix of wariness and surprised, mocking laughter spilling from her. "Well, well," she said, her voice rough and tinged with disbelief. "What brings a Hollywood star to our humble abode? Are you researching a role, Mr. Depp?" Johnny noticed she wore the same type of colostomy bag as Rena, a stark reminder of their medical struggles. "No role," Johnny replied calmly, crouching down to meet her eye level. "I met your daughters outside the hospital. They seemed to need help, and I wanted to understand the situation better." Marianne's defensiveness flared. "Is this some kind of publicity stunt?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Are there cameras waiting outside because we're not here to be your feel-good story of the week?" The twins quickly intervened, speaking over each other. "Mom, He's nice, Rose said. He gave us food and money earlier. And juice, Rena added softly. He wants to help. Johnny nodded, grateful for their words. I assure you, Marianne, this is a private matter. There are no cameras, no publicity. I'm here as a person who wants to help Rena. No strings attached. Marianne studied him, her gaze narrowed with suspicion. After a long silence, her posture shifted slightly, as if considering his words. Why? She asked, her voice quieter now. The twins went inside first to prepare their mother, while Johnny stood outside, surrounded by the harsh realities of life in the alley. The smell of rotting garbage was overwhelming, mixing with the musty scent of unwashed bodies and the stinging odor of urine. Rats scurried in the shadows, their tiny claws scraping against discarded cans and bottles. Johnny stood still, trying not to touch anything, struck by the harshness of the twins' daily existence. The greasy residue on every surface, the constant hum of distant traffic, and the echoes of nearby arguments highlighted the ever-present threats of violence and theft. This was their world, a stark contrast to Johnny's life of comfort and luxury. A renewed sense of purpose filled him. He had to help these girls and their family escape this reality. After what seemed like an eternity, but was likely only a few minutes, the twins emerged from the tent and motioned for Johnny to follow. Taking a deep breath, he ducked under the flap, preparing himself to meet the mother of these resilient girls and whatever challenges awaited him. Inside the tent, Johnny's eyes adjusted to the dim light. The space was cramped and filled with an assortment of salvaged items and worn blankets. In the middle of the tent, on a makeshift bed of flattened cardboard boxes, sat a woman who could only be the twins' mother. Marianne's eyes widened when she recognized Johnny Depp, a mix of wariness and surprised, mocking laughter spilling from her. Well, well, she said, her voice rough and tinged with disbelief. What brings a Hollywood star to our humble abode? Are you researching a role, Mr. Depp? Johnny noticed she wore the same type of colostomy bag as Rena, a stark reminder of their medical struggles. No role, Johnny replied calmly, crouching down to meet her eye level. I met your daughters outside the hospital. They seemed to need help, and I wanted to understand the situation better. Marianne's defensiveness flared. Is this some kind of publicity stunt? She asked, her voice sharp. Are there cameras waiting outside because we're not here to be your feel-good story of the week? The twins quickly intervened, speaking over each other. Mom, he's nice, Rose said. He gave us food and money earlier. And juice, Rena added softly. He wants to help. Johnny nodded, grateful for their words. I assure you, Marianne, this is a private matter. There are no cameras, no publicity. I'm here as a person who wants to help Rena. No strings attached. Marianne studied him, her gaze narrowed with suspicion. After a long silence, her posture shifted slightly, as if considering his words. Why? She asked, her voice quieter now. Marianne's question hung in the air, heavy with skepticism. Why would you care about us? She asked, her tone raw with the weight of her experiences. Johnny took a deep breath, carefully considering his response. Because no child should have to live like this, he said simply, his voice steady. Especially not a child dealing with a serious medical condition. I have the means to help, and I want to. That's all there is to it. Marianne's gaze flickered to her daughters, and Johnny could see the complex mix of love and worry that tugged at her. Slowly, her guarded demeanor softened, her voice quieting as she spoke. It hasn't always been like this. We had a normal life once. As Marianne began to share their story, Johnny listened intently. She spoke of her husband, a man who had been supportive when they first learned that one of the twins, Rena, had inherited his bowel disease. He'd been there for the medical appointments, helping adapt their life to Rena's needs. But over time, things began to change. In the second year, her husband started to grow distant, spending more time away from home. Marianne's voice broke as she recounted the night everything fell apart. He came home late, packed a bag, and told us we had to leave. Just like that. He'd met someone else, someone without the baggage of a sick child. We had nowhere to go, no time to gather our things. He changed the locks while we stood on the sidewalk. As Marianne spoke, the twins huddled closer to her, the pain of that betrayal still fresh in their eyes. 5 years of homelessness had followed, Each day a battle for survival. My condition's gotten worse, Marianne admitted, gesturing to her own colostomy bag. The lack of proper hygiene, the stress, it takes its toll. But Rena, she looked at her daughter with fierce determination. Her case might still be reversible. If we could just get her the right treatment, she might have a chance at a normal life. Johnny leaned forward, his resolve firm. I want to help, he said. I can cover the treatment and surgery costs for both of you. I have connections with a senior internist at the hospital who could oversee Rena's case. Hope flickered in Marianne's eyes, but she quickly tempered it with caution. If you help us, she warned, it can't be halfway. We'd need a complete extraction from this life. Even a hint that we're getting medical treatment could make us targets here. People get desperate, you understand? If they think we suddenly have money or resources... Her voice trailed off, the danger of their situation clear. Johnny nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. I understand, and I'll make sure we're discreet. The tension in the air was palpable as they moved through the alley, each step taken with a quiet urgency. Johnny kept his gaze focused ahead, his senses heightened. The girls moved swiftly, their small frames darting between shadows, seemingly at home in the chaos around them. Marianne followed closely behind, her pain and exhaustion evident, but pushed aside for the moment by the need for escape. As they neared the mouth of the alley, the sounds of distant traffic grew louder, and the world outside seemed to beckon. But the alley still felt like a maze of danger, a place where every corner held an unknown threat. Johnny felt a surge of gratitude for the twins' familiarity with their environment. They guided the way with a confidence born from years of navigating this perilous space. The worst part was over. Uncle Teddy was still asleep, and the group had moved past the most dangerous areas. However, Johnny knew that the hardest part of this journey was yet to come, getting them far enough away that they wouldn't be drawn back into this life. The girl's eyes, wide with both fear and excitement, told him just how crucial this moment was. As they exited the alley and stepped into the relative safety of the busier street, Johnny couldn't help but look back, the shadow of the alley lingering in his mind. He knew this wasn't the end, but a new chapter for the family, one that they could finally begin on their own terms. Are you okay? He asked Marianne softly as they slowed their pace, now out of immediate danger. She nodded, but her exhaustion was palpable. I will be, thanks to you. I can't believe we're leaving. It feels unreal. Johnny smiled, though he could sense the uncertainty still gripping her. It's real, Marianne. We're going to make sure you all get the help you need. Rose looked up at him, her expression hopeful. You really mean it, don't you? Johnny met her gaze, his smile softening. I do, I promise you. As they walked down the street, away from the alley and toward a future that seemed more hopeful than it had in years, Johnny couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, his first step toward a new beginning, was only the beginning of something even bigger. As they entered the consultation room, Johnny could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on them. The sterile environment, the white walls and medical charts on the desk felt worlds away from the chaos they had just escaped. Marianne and the twins sat stiffly, their discomfort palpable, as if they were waiting for someone to come in and tell them they didn't belong here. Johnny, however, seemed resolute. He gave Marianne a reassuring look, then turned to the twins, offering them a quiet smile. You're safe now, he murmured, trying to ease their obvious tension. Rose nodded, but Rena, still clinging to her sister, was wary, her eyes constantly scanning the room as if expecting trouble to follow them inside. Moments later, the door opened and a tall, calm figure entered. Dr. Miracle, a seasoned internist Johnny knew from past charity work, stepped in with a warm smile that immediately put the group at ease. Mr. Depp, he greeted, his eyes flicking over to the family with a quiet understanding. You've brought them in at the right time. I'll take good care of them. Johnny introduced the family briefly, his tone calm but firm. This is Marianne, Rose, and Rena. Rena's condition is serious. She needs help, and so does her mother. Can you help them both? Dr. Miracle nodded, his expression serious. I'll need to run some tests, but I think we can start treatment right away. I'll have one of my colleagues prepare a room for Rena. Marianne, we'll get you settled too. I assume both of you have medical needs that need immediate attention? Marianne nodded stiffly, her hands gripping the edges of her jacket. Yes, my condition has worsened. I don't even remember the last time I had proper care. We'll get you the help you need, Dr. Miracle assured her. It's not too late. Rose looked up at Johnny with wide eyes, still unsure whether this was all a dream. Johnny met her gaze, offering her a reassuring smile. We're going to make sure you're all right. I'll be right here. The doctor led the family out, his calm demeanor guiding them through the hospital's maze of hallways. Johnny stayed behind for a moment, catching his breath, and then followed, his mind racing with everything that still needed to be done. As the nurse entered, Johnny stepped back, giving her space to work. The atmosphere in the room was still heavy, with the weight of the situation pressing on everyone. Marianne, though grateful, still wore an air of disbelief as she watched the nurse prepare the necessary equipment for Rena's tests. Rose and Rena, despite their nervousness, seemed to take solace in the fact that they were no longer surrounded by the constant danger of the street. Johnny could see the exhaustion in their eyes, the quiet trauma of years spent struggling to survive. Yet in this sterile, well-lit hospital room, there was a flicker of hope, a hope that he knew could make all the difference. You've already done more than anyone ever has for us, Marianne said softly, looking up at Johnny with teary eyes. This feels unreal. I didn't think we'd ever get out of there. Johnny gave her a small smile, his voice steady. This is just the beginning. We're going to help you and your daughters get back on your feet. But right now, the most important thing is your health. As the nurse gently drew blood from Rena, Johnny turned his attention to the twins. He knew they had seen so much in their young lives, things that no child should ever have to witness. Yet there was still a spark in their eyes. Hope, yes, but also something else. A quiet strength. I'm going to make sure you get a chance at a real life, Johnny said, his voice low but firm. No more living in that alley. No more worrying about what happens tomorrow. You'll have a future. Rose nodded silently, squeezing her sister's hand as she watched the nurse finish up. Rena, for the first time in what felt like forever, allowed herself to relax slightly, trusting that perhaps this wasn't just another fleeting moment of kindness that would disappear with the next turn of events. Marianne wiped a tear from her cheek, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Thank you. Thank you so much, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what else to say. Johnny's expression softened. You don't need to say anything. Just get better. That's all that matters now. The nurse finished her work, offering them a comforting smile before leaving to prepare the test. As the door clicked shut behind her, Johnny turned to the family once more, determined to keep his promise. We'll take it one step at a time, but we're doing this together, Johnny said, locking eyes with each of them. His resolve was unshakable. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them, just as he was now by their side. Johnny took a seat next to Marianne, his gaze softening as he watched her silently process everything that had just happened. The relief in her eyes was tempered by the exhaustion she had been carrying for years, but there was also something new there. Hope. Are you okay? Johnny asked quietly, his voice a comforting contrast to the sterile sounds of the hospital around them. Marianne nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. I never thought we'd get this far, she admitted, her voice trembling. I thought we were just living on borrowed time, but now, her words faltered as the weight of the situation hit her again. This is more than I ever imagined. I don't even know how to believe it. Johnny gave her a reassuring smile. Believe it. You're getting the help you need now, and I'm not going anywhere. We'll do this together. Marianne gave a soft, watery laugh, looking down at her hands. I've tried so hard to protect them, Johnny. Rose and Rena, they deserve more. They deserve a life where they don't have to fight every single day just to survive. And now, she looked up at him, her expression filled with vulnerability. You're giving us that chance. Johnny's expression softened, and he leaned forward slightly. You don't have to thank me, he said. It's not about me. It's about giving your girls a future, a real future. Marianne nodded, her eyes briefly flickering to the door, where the girls had just left. I never thought I'd be able to give them that. A future, something they could dream about. We've been stuck, trapped. I've been fighting to keep us alive, but I didn't know how to fix what was broken. Johnny placed a hand on her shoulder gently. You've done more than you think. You've kept them safe, loved, and together. That's no small thing. The door opened again, and Nurse Emily stepped in, her face bright with a mix of professionalism and relief. Rena's blood work is done, and we've scheduled the imaging studies for her tomorrow. Marianne, I'll be doing yours next, if you're ready. Marianne stood, her knees a little unsteady, but her resolve was stronger now. She gave Johnny one last look, her eyes filled with gratitude, before walking with Nurse Emily toward the examination room. Johnny watched them go, a quiet sense of fulfillment washing over him. There was still so much to be done, but this was a crucial first step, a step toward a better life for the family who had been lost in the shadows for far too long. As he glanced out the window, he couldn't help but reflect on how much his own life had changed in the last few days. What began as a chance encounter with two lost souls had turned into something far greater than he ever expected. Johnny didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew this. He was going to do everything in his power to make sure that, for once, hope didn't fade from these girls' lives. "How are you holding up?" Johnny asked, pulling up a chair to sit across from her. Marianne took a deep breath. "It's a lot to take in," she admitted. "I'm so grateful, but I can't help worrying about what comes next. Even with medical care, where will we go after treatment? We can't go back to the streets, especially not with Rena recovering from surgery." Johnny nodded, understanding her concerns. "I've been thinking about that," he said. "I have connections with organizations that specialize in supporting homeless families. We can work on finding you stable housing, maybe even some job training programs to help you get back on your feet." Marianne's eyes widened. "You'd do all that for us?" "Absolutely," Johnny affirmed. "This isn't just about immediate medical care. It's about giving you and your girls a real chance at a stable future." As they continued to talk, Johnny outlined his ideas for vocational training and potential job opportunities for Marianne. The conversation shifted from immediate medical needs to long-term stability planning, painting a picture of a future that had seemed impossible just hours ago. When Nurse Emily returned with the twins, both sporting small bandages on their arms from the blood draw, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. There was still anxiety about the medical procedures to come, but it was tempered by a newfound hope for the future. "All right, Marianne," Nurse Emily said gently, "it's your turn for the blood work, then we'll get you all set up for your other tests." As Marianne followed Nurse Emily out of the room, Johnny watched the twins settle back onto the examination table. Their faces were a mix of excitement and nervousness, the reality of their changing circumstances starting to sink in. "You two have been so brave," Johnny said, smiling at Rose and Rena. "How are you feeling about all of this?" Rose spoke up first, her voice quiet but steady. "It's scary," she admitted, "but good scary, I think. Like maybe things might actually get better." Rena nodded. Johnny quickly glanced through the messages, but his mind was more on the moment at hand than the world outside. He knew he had obligations, calls from his agent, reminders about film schedules, but none of that mattered right now. He had made a commitment to these people, and he couldn't afford to get distracted. His phone could wait. Marianne had finished the paperwork, her brow furrowed in concentration, but her face marked by a quiet sense of accomplishment. She handed the forms back to the nurse, and Johnny smiled reassuringly at her. "You're doing great," he said. "This is all part of the process, and we're getting closer to the care you both deserve." Marianne nodded, a small, tired smile tugging at her lips. She glanced up at him, her gratitude evident, but there was still a lingering wariness in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. Johnny shook his head, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "I'm doing what anyone should do. No one should have to go through this alone. I'm just glad I could be here to help." Just then, the nurse who had been with Rena earlier walked back in, a smile on her face. "Rena's all set for her tests," she said. "She's handling it well, and they'll be ready for imaging soon." Johnny felt a sense of relief. The immediate medical needs for Rena were being addressed, and it was a step in the right direction. Turning to Marianne, he nodded toward the door. "Let's get you to your next appointment. After that, we can talk about the next steps, okay?" Marianne gave him a grateful look and stood, still somewhat unsteady but with renewed resolve. Together they made their way down the sterile hallway, the sounds of hospital staff going about their work filling the air. Johnny, though, was lost in his thoughts. What had started as a chance encounter had turned into a pivotal moment in his life and the lives of this family. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, and there were so many hurdles still to face. But in this moment, Johnny was sure of one thing. He was committed to helping them, no matter what it took. Johnny exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, the tension in his shoulders easing ever so slightly. "That's good to hear, Doc," he said, his voice steady. "Whatever tests or treatments you need, just let me know. We'll make it happen." Rena's eyes lit up with a mixture of hope and nervousness. "Does that mean I might not have to wear the bag anymore?" she asked tentatively. Dr. Miracle knelt down to her level, his tone gentle but honest. "It means we're going to try our best to see if that's possible," he said. "You've been very brave, and that's going to help a lot. But it's a process, and we'll need to take it one step at a time." Rena nodded, her tiny hands gripping her sister's for support. Rose squeezed back, her own expression a mirror of cautious optimism. Mary Ann, standing behind them, let out a shaky sigh. "Doctor," she said, her voice wavering, "if there's even a chance for Rena to have a better life." "There is," Dr. Miracle assured her. "We'll do everything we can." Johnny glanced at Mary Ann and then at the twins. He could see the flicker of hope growing in their eyes, fragile but undeniable. It was the first time in years, perhaps, that they allowed themselves to believe that things could change. Dr. Miracle stood, his tone becoming more businesslike. "Let's move forward with the imaging tests. Rena, are you ready?" Rena nodded, her grip on Rose's hand tightening. "I'm ready." The group filed out of the consultation room, heading toward the radiology department. Johnny walked alongside Marianne, who was moving a little more steadily now, her determination evident. As they moved through the hospital corridors, Johnny felt his phone vibrate again in his pocket. He ignored it, focusing instead on the moment in front of him. His career, the missed meeting, the director's frustrations, they could wait. Right now, this was what mattered. And for the first time in a long while, Johnny felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Johnny's fingers trembled slightly as he pressed the call button, not out of hesitation, but from the weight of the responsibility he had taken on. The line connected quickly, and a familiar voice answered. "Johnny, this is unexpected. What's going on?" Johnny exhaled deeply before speaking. "I need your help. I've come across a family in desperate need. Mother and 2 kids. They're homeless, dealing with severe medical issues. I want to get them placed in a shelter with proper facilities, somewhere they can recover in peace." The person on the other end paused, their tone shifting to one of concern. "That's a tall order, but I'll see what I can do. Do you have any specifics on their medical needs or immediate concerns?" Johnny glanced back at the consultation room where Marianne and the twins waited. "The younger girl is likely facing surgery tomorrow. They need a clean, safe space, something permanent or at least long-term. Can you pull some strings?" "I'll start making calls," came the reply, laced with determination. "Give me a couple of hours." "Thanks," Johnny said, relief evident in his voice. "This means everything to them." Ending the call, he stood in the quiet hallway, the faint hum of hospital machinery in the background. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly connected to something beyond himself. It wasn't about image or reputation. It was about giving these people a chance at a new beginning. Johnny returned to the consultation room to find Rose and Rena back from their tests. Their faces lit up when he shared the progress he had made in securing them a safe place to stay. "You'll have a clean, warm room and proper meal," he said, crouching to their level. "It's not a mansion, but it's a start." Rose's eyes brimmed with tears as she threw her arms around his neck. Rena joined in, her small hands gripping his jacket. Johnny hugged them tightly, overwhelmed by the innocence and gratitude in their gestures. Marianne watched silently, her own emotions too complex to articulate. Finally, she managed to whisper, "You've given us more than hope, Johnny. You've given us a chance to dream again." Johnny stood, his heart full. "This is just the beginning," he said. "You've got a whole team behind you now." As the day pressed on, the wheels of change began turning. Test results came back, plans were solidified, and hope took root in the hearts of a family that had known only struggle. For Johnny, the sacrifices he had made felt insignificant compared to the lives he was helping to rebuild. Marianne stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said softly. "You've done so much for us, more than anyone ever has." Johnny shook his head, offering her a gentle smile. "You don't need to thank me. This is the least I can do. You've been through so much, and now it's time for things to turn around." The girls clung to him for a moment longer before reluctantly pulling away, their faces lighting up with tentative smiles. Rose glanced at her mother, then back at Johnny. "Does this mean Rena will be okay?" Johnny crouched to meet her eyes. "It means she's going to get the best care possible," he said firmly. "We're all in this together now, and we're going to do everything we can to help her heal." Dr. Miracle entered the room then, holding a clipboard. His expression was a mix of seriousness and optimism. "Good news," he began, addressing Marianne and Johnny. "The test confirmed that surgery tomorrow is the best course of action. Rena's condition is delicate, but the early intervention gives her an excellent chance of recovery." Marianne let out a shaky breath, relief and anxiety warring on her face. "Thank you, doctor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Miracle nodded. "She'll need a lot of rest after the procedure, and her environment will be crucial for her recovery. If you've secured suitable accommodations, that's a big step in the right direction." Johnny nodded. "We're working on it. They'll have a safe, clean place to stay by tomorrow evening." The doctor gave a small, approving smile. "Good. Let's focus on the surgery for now. I'll have my team check in with you first thing in the morning." As Dr. Miracle left the room, Johnny turned back to the family. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said, "but we're moving forward, and that's what matters." Marianne placed a hand on his arm, her gratitude evident in her tear-filled eyes. "You've given us hope again, Johnny. I'll never forget this." Johnny smiled softly, looking at the small but determined family before him. "Neither will I," he said. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly grounded, as though this was exactly where he was meant to be. As the family's plans began to solidify, Johnny felt a profound sense of fulfillment wash over him. This wasn't the scripted drama of a movie set or the fleeting adulation of fans. This was real, raw humanity. People in need, lives changed by a simple act of kindness and a shared determination to move forward. Marianne wiped her tears and looked at Johnny with newfound determination. "You've not only given us hope, but you've shown us that there are still people out there who care, truly care." Johnny placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. "It's not just about caring, it's about action. And this is just the start. You've got a community now, people ready to support you, and I'll make sure it stays that way." As the evening settled, Johnny stayed with the family as hospital staff finalized the logistics for the next day's surgery and their eventual transition to the shelter. The medical staff, who initially seemed wary of Johnny's involvement, now regarded him with quiet admiration. His genuine concern and proactive efforts spoke volumes. Later, as Johnny stepped out into the cool night air, he took a deep breath. His phone buzzed again, a silent tug toward the life he had momentarily left behind. But instead of the anxiety or guilt he expected, he felt a quiet confidence. He pulled out his phone, finally scrolling through the messages from his agent and the director. They were still angry, still demanding explanations, but Johnny saw them in a new light. Yes, his professional commitments mattered, but today had taught him that there was more to his life than career ambitions. With steady fingers, he typed out a response to his agent, addressing the missed meeting and promising to reschedule, but making it clear where his priorities had been that day. The world wouldn't wait forever, but for once, Johnny didn't feel the pressure to rush. As he walked back to the hospital, the stars above seemed a little brighter, the night air a little fresher. The choice he had made today wasn't just about one family, it was about rediscovering his own humanity, his ability to give, and his desire to make a difference beyond the screen. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but it would also bring hope. And for Johnny Depp, that was worth everything.